Hello friends, welcome to Research Life. I am your host Dr. Sabyasachi Sengupta, founder and director of Sengupta's Research Academy and practicing vitreoretinal surgeon in Mumbai. Research Live is a platform meant to ignite the spirit of clinical research amongst all of us. Here I host some of the most eminent researchers in India and am confident that their journey will inspire us all.
Dear friends, I hope you are enjoying these episodes of Research Live as much as I am enjoying bringing them to you. Today we have with us Dr. Santosh Honawar, one of the shining stars in Indian ophthalmology, a stalwart, a superachiever, and the current editor of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology and head of CFS Education. Dr. Honawar had his basic medical education at the Bangalore Medical College and received his residency training in ophthalmology, followed by senior residency in ophthalmic plastic surgery and ocular oncology at the RP Center for Ophthalmic Sciences at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi. He was adjudged the best resident during his tenure. Dr. Honawar further trained in ocular oncology and was mentored by Professor Jerry Shields and Professor Carol Shields at the Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, US, and also became a fellow of the prestigious American College of Surgeons. On his return to India, Dr. Honawar headed the Department of Ophthalmic Plastic Surgery at L.V. Prasad Eye Institute in Hyderabad and was responsible for its exponential growth and diversification. He thereafter established the Ocular Oncology Service, the first such facility in the country, and added a comprehensive multi-specialty children's eye cancer center as well. He was also an adjunct professor at the University of Rochester in New York State in the US and Case Western University at Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. Honawar currently heads the Department of Ophthalmic Plastic Surgery and Ocular Oncology and the National Retinoblastoma Foundation at the Center for Sight at Hyderabad. Dr. Honawar runs a very active fellowship program in ophthalmic plastic surgery and ocular oncology and has trained over 70 national and international fellows till date. PG teaching programs have been his focus, and the IPEP for LVPI, the iShala for AIOS, and the iFocus for CSF education that he helped establish are very popular and have inspired and ignited the minds of generations of ophthalmology residents. Teachers training programs by the ICO and now Wisdom Tree address the needs of PG teachers. Dr. Honawar has extensively published in peer-reviewed journals with over 270 publications to his credit and has written several book chapters. The significance of his academic contributions can be gauged by his high citation indices with over 7,600 citations, an H index of 45 and an I-10 index of 144, one of the highest in Indian ophthalmology. His research interests comprise of tumors of the ocular surface, orbit, and retinoblastoma. Dr. Honawar's overall research contributions have had very significant impact on the diagnosis and management of retinoblastoma and its outcomes. As the current editor of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, he has been responsible for its renaissance and the soaring impact factor. Some of the major awards to his credit include the Colonel Rangachari Gold Medal by AIOS in 1992, the Ziegler International Fellowship by Orbis International, the prestigious Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award by the Government of India in 2010, the Jerry Shields International Award by APAO in 2013, the APAO Distinguished Service Award in 2018, the Keynote Oration at RANSCO in 2019. He is the first Indian ophthalmologist to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award by the American Academy of Ophthalmology in 2019 and the highest award of the Royal College of Ophthalmologists UK, that is its honorary fellowship in 2020. Believe me, these are only snapshots of what Dr. Honawar has achieved over the years. He has been inspirational to a whole generation of ophthalmologists like me. He is much loved across the ophthalmology world as a great clinician, researcher, teacher, and indulgent mentor. So, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Santosh Honawar.
So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Sunny. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you so much.
So the first question is, how did your clinical research and publications journey start, and what motivated you to get into this?
Okay, so journey is actually a long one. I don't know where to begin, but final year MBBS, I was involved in a ICMR project with some collaboration with Indian Institute of Science. So that actually exposed me to the way scientists work and things like that. No, otherwise you're never taught all this in a medical college. But that didn't result in anything significant because you get busy with your postgraduate entrance exams and stuff like that. But when I got into RP Center, there was a totally different atmosphere there. Everybody was charged at that time, and I'm sure it is the same even now. That RP Center had and still has a charged atmosphere where everybody tries to get the best out of themselves and others also around them. So that I think was a motivating factor. And some of the younger faculty at that time, Dr. Mahipal was a very young faculty assistant professor, Dr. Atul and Dr. Vajpayee were very high on publications. So they would catch hold of young junior residents and would motivate them, take them to their room, and then kind of show how to write, and then they would give you a small case, or the case that you would have presented in one of the grand rounds would be a matter of case report in DOS journal, DOS newsletter as it used to be called, and finally that is how it started. Small little steps, case reports, small series.
Okay, so ICMR projects, I think, was an initiation which should not be, underlooked, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nice project, but you just get to work a little bit in such a project. It initiates you, and then finally, I think.
I also had it the very same way. As in, the first thing was the ICMR project, and then that really put that seed in your mind. I think that's
right.
Right. So the next question was, did you have a mentor whom you looked up to and whom you followed later on?
Well, I had several mentors at each stage of my life. I'm so fortunate to have extremely good mentors. Mentors who I think are ideal. Anybody would love to have such mentors. First one was my thesis chief guide, Professor Sood. N.N. Sood, he was the boss of Glaucoma, and he was such a ethical person, and he was so good, so kind, so nice, and so motivating. And if he took liking in you, then he would really motivate you and he would really mentor you. That is one. And Professor Tiwari was everybody's mentor there in Api Center. So you would go to him, and he was like a father figure. He would encourage all of us. In fact, to the extent that those days American Academy, was a big thing, and we would send printed abstracts by mail, and he would encourage all the junior residents who are interested in such a thing to send these printed abstracts, and it would be typed in his office by his secretary. We had to fill that box with 100 words, and the results would come by mail around 22nd July or around that week. And he would encourage, at least half of us would get it accepted, half of us may not even have it accepted, but he would encourage all of us to fill in the CSIR, DST, INSA forms and keep it ready. And on the day that we got the results, we would bike down to CSIR and give our application for travel grant. To that extent, we would mentor. And later, of course, it is legendary Dr. Rao, and although I was not his fellow, he took me under his wings, fortunately, and mentored me all through my 17 years at LVPI. I was his mentee, I never grew out of that role because I wanted him to mentor all through. And he's still a mentor. He's a mentor for IGO now. He guides me a lot about IGO. And initial first few issues were actually, I used to consult him a lot. I still wait for his encouragement when I write something good. I eagerly look forward to his email as a word of encouragement. And between that, of course, the Shields couple, Jerry and Carol Shields, those were the greatest influences in my life.
So I think that's a great lineup of people who
have very fortunate, very extremely fortunate to have such men.
Propped you up with so many. I think that's superb to hear, sir. So the next question was, when did you publish your first paper? And I know there have been so many after that, of course. But when did you publish your first paper, and what exactly did you do for that paper?
Yeah, it was, I think, junior residency, second year, third year, started the process. Second year junior residency. So it was with Dr. Vajpayee on, we had a couple of cases when I was posted with him of posterior capsular rupture following trauma. And he started noticing different types of posterior capsular rents during surgery, that pre-existing posterior capsular rents. And that we put it all together as a series, and then we published in Journal of Cataract and Refractive Surgery. So my first publication was all about cataract. And then it graduated to cysticercosis with Dr. Amanjit Sihota, and we had publication in BJO, Archives and AGO. About 12, I think, during residency.
Wow, I think that's a tremendous number during residency. It really possibly set you up for so many good things to come. I think that's all the important message that we can send out is you must do more.
It's not because of the faculty. I had no role to play there. Even if you did a very little bit of that work, they would ask you to write up the first draft, and they would actually rewrite it. They had to rewrite it. Initial few drafts, I think they rewrote almost everything till we got hold of the skills to write things up.
Right, but looking at them and the way they rewrite is also a huge learning experience, I suppose. So,
Right.
right, sir. Okay, sir. So the next question is, how important do you think it is to start early in life, possibly during MBBS days, like you had a bit of initiation? And do you think it is okay to start much later, or is it better to start early?
Anytime is a good time. Anytime absolutely is a good time. Earlier the better, of course, but residency I think is the right time to start. Then senior residency or fellowship. Then that kind of puts you on a track when you become a faculty or a consultant somewhere, or even when you go to private practice. If you are still oriented to doing research and publishing, then you'll continue all through your life. But it is not a race that you run. It's like marathon. You always try to have a better timing, but you never aspire to win a marathon. It's difficult to win something. So
Right.
anytime.
Yeah, anytime is a good time, right, sir? The next I wanted to know is, do you think it is important to have formal training in research methodology before someone begins, or is it okay to learn along the way?
Well, I believe it is very important to have formal training. Formal in the sense, it is a skill that can be learned with experience, but that will take a long time. Like it is like learning surgery. You can learn surgery by yourself, making several mistakes on the way. But each wrong step might demotivate you. It is publication versus not getting a publication just because you have made that mistake in your statistical analysis. So it is always good to have extremely good background knowledge and training in research methodologies before you venture into research in current times. Earlier, when we started off, there was nothing formal research training as such. There was not much of internet those days, and we had to read books to learn, and which is very difficult. Nobody would explain to you. You had to read and try to understand those books. Now, I think with all these courses online, etc., I think it's really good if you are prepared for this.
Yes,
That will take you ahead of time, 4-5 years at least, save a lot of time.
there are plenty of courses which are there. I have a course, and then there are so many more. So
I think your course is extremely good. People appreciate it.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
And also you have, we've listened to your lectures on internet resources where you also have brought out so many different ones, which some of them also include research methodology. I think that is really nice. But
the formal thing, I think, is a part of the fellowship, part of the residency. In fact, it should start when they start their thesis. That is the right time. Because a wrongly done thesis is of no use, right? So if they have background in research methodology, in fact, the thesis should be pushed to second semester. First 6 months, along with the basics of anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pharmacology, examination of the eye, they should learn research methodology. And then in the second 6 months, the thesis should start. That would actually be good. Before even they start collecting samples, they should know how to, know the numbers, right? So
I think, that is a really important thing that maybe administrators should look into, pushing the thesis a little down the line. That may be better. Right.
They can always tie up if they don't have inherent talent within that organization to do research methodology training. They can always tie up with people from outside, who can come and give a series of lectures. If not for that particular medical college, for the entire group of medical colleges in that particular city or a district or a state,
Right. So the next thing I wanted to know is how important is an international stint or a fellowship to enhance your research skills? We know that you had one along the way, but what impact did it have on you, and what is its importance, in developing?
It has a tremendous impact. It opens your eyes wide. Actually, you're bewildered when you go there and see the kind of things that they do. You only read them, but the way it is done actually opens up your eyes. It broadens your horizon. You would be like a frog in a well, but it's like suddenly being from a frog in a well going to this vast sea. It's like that. It's a huge experience. If not anything else, it would kind of encourage you and at least put you on a path to the proper way of doing things as far as research is concerned, and even for that matter, clinical skills. So it had a huge impact on me. I think it was a life-changing experience, I can say that.
I think your fellowship also has a part of this international stint as part of your CFS
Right.
fellowship. I think that is really,
It's
really
purposely
motivates.
kept so that, it's purposely kept for the same reason.
Right. So it can be a life-changing experience, especially when you are sent to a proper mentor and you get exactly what you're looking for. So I think that is
They
tremendous.
remain mentors for life. It's not that you just have a mentor for a temporary phase in life. they are mentors for life.
Yes, sir. So your fellowship really is, that's why it's so coveted, and of course it even your training going through with you is a life-changing experience as well. So I mean, I don't know whether it is a life-changing experience anymore for others after having experienced your training, but then it does open up horizons, I'm sure. Right, sir. Okay, sir. So the next thing I wanted to know is, how do you get, or how did you get so many different research ideas to work on? That so many of your papers have addressed so many key issues that we don't even think about. So how did you get those ideas?
I don't. That's an overstatement. Actually, I am not. I am not accomplished in terms of research that way. I only get clinical ideas. I never got an. Unfortunately, I'm very grateful to what I've got in life. Extremely grateful. But that pain is there at the back that I never got the opportunity to do translational research or basic research at all. LVP was a great place, but ocular oncology was just starting, and I couldn't. That is probably something in myself that I couldn't motivate any of the basic scientists to work on tumors or oculoplasty aspects. They were busy with other things like, say, retinitis pigmentosa, corneal dystrophies, but they never could get to work on retinoblastoma, melanoma, etc. So that is a part of unfulfilled part of mine. But what I get are only clinical ideas. There are no eureka moments for me. I simply keep correcting cases. I see all my cases post-operatively and during treatment, and then somewhere during that phase, I understand that this probably made the difference, and that is a paper.
That's, I think, a very important message there is document your cases, keep a keen eye out, and keep asking questions every day in clinics where a lot of ideas will then emerge. You can pursue some of them. So the next and I think very important question is, how is the Indian research scenario different in a government institution versus a tertiary care referral center like LV Prasad, and then a corporate center like CFS, and also your experiences at with the Shield? So you've seen a whole barrage of different setups. So how would you compare the Indian scenario in the government, the tertiary care center, as well as a corporate center?
I think if you're an individual researcher with focus on clinical research, it really doesn't matter as long as you have independence to document your cases and publish. So it is immaterial. But if you're interested in basic research or translational research, then you need backup and funding. Funding is something whether it's the question of whether chicken comes first or the egg. To get funding, you have to have some research background, and to have that basic research background in publications, you have to have funding. So that seed funding has to come from somebody, and that most of the institutions do a great job in giving that. If you are a private practitioner or in a private organization, there is nothing called research funding. It has to be from your own resources, which is very difficult these days. Each reagent costs a lot. So that is the only difference. If you are a clinical researcher, no big deal. But if you want to do something really substantial right from the basics and take it up, that's very difficult. The difference between India and the West is the kind of support that they get. I would see Carol Shields, I can say it on recording, they have such wonderful support system. She would just say, Marianne, this is a good case. That's all. Marianne was the secretary. And by Friday morning, which is a research day, Friday, Saturday, Marianne would keep everything ready on her table, including the pictures of the same patient, everything. So she simply had to write or dictate or whatever. That's it. Obviously, with so many publications, 1,000+ publications, that kind of support has been built over time. But we cannot, if I need a photograph, I have to go to the photographer, I have to sit with the photographer. So there is support system is something that we haven't, I think that environment we haven't built up, whichever may be the place. That's the huge difference.
So possibly the infrastructure and everything starts from... everything starts
funding limitation, purely. Yeah. People don't employ a photographer, slit lamp photographer or an external photographer just because it costs money. So they end up taking pictures on mobile phone, which is good. But after 20 years, if you find that you suddenly want to write a book, would those pictures be good enough? Have you archived? Can you search those pictures? Can you get a bunch of pictures on a particular disease unless you archived it using a database? No. So you lost all the pictures. Whatever that is not archived this is a statement that I want to make, is lost. Whatever that is not documented is lost forever.
I think it also starts with the desire, the strong, very strong desire that the Shields have, and so many in the West have to do these things, and then they
Desire and discipline.
Discipline, right?
No patient is operated without a photograph. No patient is checked out without a post-operative photograph. Matching, documented matching. That means if the eye is taken in the left gaze, it has to be taken in the exactly same angle, left gaze with the same light.
That's all, I think, really important for everyone hearing this to understand that it takes a lot of effort and mechanisms to be put in place before you see these results out.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to know is your very unique experience of publishing so many papers. Is there any particular group of papers that have made the most impact, or that are your more favorite amongst these? It's hard to choose one baby from the other, but I'm sure there are a group of papers that have made the most impact.
Histopathological risk factors in retinoblastoma. That I think changed the practice pattern. So I think that I would value as the one of my works which has had an impact. Otherwise, most of it is a follow-up study on something that has already been done. So we found that many children died despite enucleation, and then when we went into the reasons, we found that there are histopathological risk factors. And when we analyzed patients who had got chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy following enucleation, we found that itself, one single step, changes life prognosis by 20%. So we have 20% more survivors just by following that one single step. So I think that changed the practice pattern. That there was a follow-up multicentric study by Children's Oncology Group based on that. And now it is well established that adjuvant therapy helps. So that I would value as the most.
So I think we've read all of those series of papers and have seen the kind of impact that they make every day in clinics, and it has impacted millions and millions of children's lives. So it has really had a huge impact. Not too many people are fortunate enough to be involved in in projects of that magnitude, but hats off that you did it. So I just wanted to know how did you contribute? You were the first or second author in so many of these papers. So did you actually carry these out in terms of making the Excel to analysis to writing, or?
Absolutely. Right from conceptualization to sample size calculation to making the Excel sheet, getting it analyzed. Of course, we used a statistician to get it analyzed, writing the first draft, everything. So whenever you are the first author, you're obligated to do all this. Otherwise, you can't aspire to be a first author.
Right. And I think the thought process that what is going wrong and why is this happening, and so that is again a clinical question that you talked about before, and that really caused you to dig deeper and deeper as to why. So that really shows that research is really going one step beyond what others are doing, right?
Well, it is just that you have to understand that there are limitations, and you should look at answers for those limitations. That's all. You have a clinical question which is unique for your situation or your country. That is what you try to answer. Right. Whatever that is relevant. So relevant clinical research, I think, is most important. In fact, all through 1800s and 1900s, what drove science and medicine was clinical research. Molecular research was hardly there at that time, isn't it? So from wherever we were Stone Age to wherever we came to in late 1990s, it was all based on clinical research, strong clinical research.
Right, sir.
So there is still scope for good clinical research.
I'm sure. So the next question is again very unique to you in being the editor of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, and so what have been some of your better experiences during your editorship at IJO, and what are any lessons learned that you want to send out to people watching?
I think it was a wonderful experience. It still is a wonderful experience. It keeps me engaged. I'm basically a restless person. I keep finding things to do, to keep myself occupied and engaged. Otherwise, I might binge on Netflix or YouTube, which is not a good thing. At the end of it, it doesn't leave you, with too much of satisfaction. So I think that is one. So it keeps me occupied. What have I learned from IJO is that I have learned that truly, honestly, that Indian research has a huge depth in batting order. We think that these are the ones who are doing good research, but absolutely no. extremely good quality papers are coming from some of the residents, fellows, very young faculty who are not yet broken through the barrier of coming onto the podium for podium presentations. We don't see them on the podium. We don't see them on AIOS program. We don't see them on state program list. But their work is stupendous. Extremely good quality work. So that is what has taught me. It is very optimistic to note that we have such great talents. Who documentation skills are phenomenal. The pictures are just mind blowing. Whatever there are limitations, they overcome it, and then they do a great job. So that is what I have learned. So yeah, I think that's a nice thing for youngsters to get encouraged from. Anybody in any situation can publish a good job. They can do a good job.
Right, sir. So I think some really encouraging words from someone like you who really has a view of the whole panorama of what is going on across
You
the
also
country.
know it, Sunny. You review as well, and you are an associate editor. You know that the quality of submissions have tremendously improved. In fact,
Yes.
number has quadrupled, but quality has tremendously improved. So.
Yes. Quality with quantity. I think IGO is now getting a lot of international exposure as well. So many of my teachers at Johns Hopkins or at University of Michigan keep asking me about are there any collaborative groups that I can start a study with, or what can we do with your teams and things like that. So most of this is coming out because they are reading IGO quite regularly. They know that a lot of
cite it as well. We need a better impact factor.
Yes, I'm sure that is on its way. I'm sure, sir, that is on its way. With all of your efforts, I'm sure that is bound to happen. Right, sir. The next thing I wanted to know is how did you manage to devote so much time to your research activities, especially during your time at LVPI when you had so many administrative duties, as well as so many other commitments, so travel and other things. How did you actually devote your time to research activities?
The credit entirely goes to my colleagues and younger faculty who were working with me at that time, and colleagues like pathologists. Kaustubh is a great help. Geeta Venuganti was a phenomenon, and of course the oncologists. But the fellows are the ones who do a great job. Whenever their motivation is to go to conferences. So whenever they have to write an abstract, they have to collect cases. As a bonus, I may give something which is ready, a project which is ready. But then if they have 3 abstracts to submit, at least on 2 they have to work on. So they have a motivation, and each of that can result in a work of research or publication. And if the database is kept kind of live for the future fellows to enter in, I think it can become a great source of work.
Yes, I think it's a win-win for both, for the faculty as well as the fellows. But the initiation should also come from the fellows. Not always the faculty are initiating things. So, and fellowship is the time where you really have that vigor also to do things. So, I think fellows can also push their faculties. Let's do this, let's do that, let's do this.
Yeah, and I give them first authorship, absolutely. I have very few publications as first author because I am very liberal with giving first authorship if they have done that work themselves. So that should be a motive for them.
Yeah, I think that is another very important point that a lot of faculty should also consider, that first authorship is something which the fellows really
take. It's very important for them at that stage.
And they keep it with themselves for the rest of their life. So I think that is something which people should probably look at. That's it. And so the last question is, as we come to the end of this very exciting session with you, is any particular message you want to send out to young researchers in India who will be watching this? Anything particular that you want to motivate them with or alert them about with all of your trailblazing experiences? So I'm sure there's a treasure trove inside. So anything that you want to...
No, I can only tell them what my mentors have told me. So I haven't gathered anything more than what I have been taught because I'm still being mentored. So first thing is to have an attitude for research. Why did you become a physician or an ophthalmologist first? It's not just to do cataract surgery, whatever surgery that you do and go home. You really want to contribute something, and I think you get the maximum kick or equivalent amount of kick with a publication. Then you do a great surgery, you feel good. you get equal amount of kick, if not more, if you get a particular article published. You see your name in print and on PubMed and being cited, I think is quite an intoxicating factor. So that having an attitude for research is very important. Then get the background, get your ABCs straight, get a training. We are not fortunate enough to have such a training in medical colleges. Agree, there are limitations in our residency program, I agree. But with online resources, there is no reason why you should hesitate to go get yourself the background for research. If you don't know how to write, you can learn how to write. If you don't know how to do statistics, you can learn how to do statistics. So get the background next. Third, I think the ABC, C is to collaborate. See, I have 5 cases of a particular disease. I'm not an institute, but somebody sitting in Mumbai, one of my former fellows may have 7 cases of the same. Somebody in other city may have 3 of those. When I put all that together, I have 40, which is maybe probably more than somebody sitting in an institute has, right? So if you collaborate with similar-minded people, of course, making sure that they're all ethical. You should not have unethical collaborations. Somebody can't sprout numbers all of a sudden. They should be having documentation. So my suggestion is to have a common Google sheet where you keep on filling. Identify your focus of interest, make a small informal group, keep on filling that Google sheet, and at the end of a couple of years or a year, visit it and see how many cases do you have of a particular disorder. And that is a huge seed material for any sort of research. So collaboration is the key. And basic science collaboration also. If you have a lab which can do a particular thing for you, get them interested with authorship. Of course, we can't pay them huge money, and they might be able to do it. Next, I think is documentation is most important. Document every case, even if it seems very simple. Everything has to be documented. No patient should go to OT without a good picture, and nobody should be checked out without a post-operative comparable photograph and long-term documentation. Then don't hesitate to experiment and learn new things. And finally, focus. You have to focus on a particular. Initially, it's good to be diffuse. We all want to have a larger CV, bigger CV, better CV, longer CV. That's fine. You can write from everything from cataract to optic nerve. That is fine. But as you grow in your career, I think it is good to focus on a particular disease or a particular aspect of a disease. That is where you can make a contribution. So finally, you have to focus. So
can you just summarize the A, B, C, D, E, and F? Just quickly.
A, I think, is attitude. B is to get the background right. C is to collaborate. D is to document. E is to be ready to experiment. And F is to focus. Diffuseness is a disease. So I always say that diffuseness is a disease. You have to focus. If you really want the best of you to come out, then you have to focus. You can do everything, but focus on one particular aspect of.
I think that was really enlightening. I just right at the end, I think it was really, really enlightening and something that people will take home with as we come to an end of this show. So thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing all your insights and all your tremendous journey with us, your mentors to your initiations and pretty much everything, including your experiences at the journal. So we thank you so much, and we hope that it will motivate all the impressionable minds. I'm not saying young minds, but all the impressionable minds who want to actually, do bigger and better things. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you so much. All the best to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's really, really nice talking to you. Okay, sir. Bye-bye.